Welcome back, everyone. I'm Massimo Rigotti, and this is the Sober Method podcast. Today, we are continuing our Perspective bonus series. Now, these are episodes that sit with the edges of addiction and the often unseen impact it has on the people who love the addict most. These conversations are about listening deeply to the ripple effects, the generational cycles, the hidden pressure, the stigma, and that quiet strength that it takes to rebuild when addiction touches every role in a family. Today, I'm sitting down with Jennifer Chase, certified life coach, founder of Rise Addiction Life Coaching, a woman in long term recovery, daughter of an alcoholic, trauma survivor, and mother of a recovering addict. Jennifer, welcome to Perspectives.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you here too. So, you've lived with addiction from every angle as a daughter of an alcoholic, as someone who spiraled into her own opioid addiction. And that was after a medical event, I
It
believe.
was. Yep. I had a
And
brain tumor.
yeah. And as a mom who realized that she had unknowingly become part of her son's supply chain. And so, from your perspective, what did that multi-layered journey look like? And what was the moment that you knew that the cycle had to break? And not just for you, but for your entire family?
And I think that's such a great question because I knew almost, around the probably 6, 7, 8 age of my life that I was in the midst of a cycle, right? Of a generational cycle. So, yes, you spoke about some trauma that I'd been through as a child. So, I'm not only the the daughter of an alcoholic, but I'm the great granddaughter of an alcoholic, the granddaughter of an alcoholic, right? Like this runs very, very deep generationally in my family. And I didn't know much growing up, but I knew I wasn't gonna be like them. Like, I viewed the adults in my life inability to break the chains of addiction as 100% weakness. Like, they could have if they had wanted to, but they didn't want to, and that I had more courage in my pinky finger that they had in their whole body. Like, that was my perception as a child, right? And I knew that I had the biology. From a very, very young age, I could see this kind of dynamic. And so I didn't know much growing up and through my high school and college years, but I could tell you that I wasn't going to do that. And it was the most important thing to me that if I had children, they were not going to be raised like I was raised. I also am unfortunately part of a statistic when we're talking about addiction, and I was also being sexually abused as a child by my mom's dad, right? Which is so prevalent in this generational thing called addiction. And I think, the interesting thing about my family is that I grew up pretty upper middle class, right? I tell people this as a joke. The week I had chickenpox, I spent at Wrigley Field watching Cubs games with my dad. Like, I had the childhood that I think many people would have been envious about, right? I got to do a lot of the fun things and we had a house on the lake and, all the things. But what was going on behind closed doors looked very different than what it looked like from the outside looking in. And I was never going to be that kind of mom, ever, never. And unfortunately, I think you'll probably agree. One of the problems with addiction and our view of addiction is that we think substance is the problem. And for me, substance wasn't even the beginning of the problem. Substance was the solution to the problem, right? And so when I had a brain tumor when I was 29 years old and was, right in the middle of the opioid epidemic, I got sick in 2003, wildly overprescribed over the next 14 years. But in the beginning of that, it's like, this isn't alcohol. This isn't what I sort of prepared myself for. Doctors are prescribing it to me. It feels like it's okay. They feel like I should be taking this. But what they didn't understand was that I had this biological and emotional component that hooked me very, very quickly when it came to opioids.
Yeah, because the necessary fixes under the surface were always there. And up until that point, I would imagine, did you feel like you were just kind of putting on a mask for all of the challenges to try to force your way through it to make sure that you were breaking the cycle without doing the work?
And I think that's the interesting thing is, even with my awareness, there were circumstances in my life where the masks became the only coping skill that I had, right? My dad was a businessman and we moved a lot. So when I was in the fifth grade, I had been in six different elementary schools. So, in order to be accepted and liked and seen and show up in these new environments, even as a kid outside of my home, I put on these masks. I just felt so unlovable and unworthy inside of my home, right? The authentic version of me did not feel like it was enough. And so
Mm.
again, these masks that I needed to be like less emotional or more quiet or less like something other than I actually was, then my dad wouldn't drink and my mom would protect me and my grandfather wouldn't hurt me and my siblings would have liked me, right? Masks were the only thing that equated to safety for me growing up.
Yeah, exactly. So those early family dynamics, that kind of codependency and performance that you used to cope kind of turned into that like self-blame, but the ability to then control. And then you notice the stigma around that substance use in your life, and then later your sons. So how did you begin to separate your own worth from those roles, from the masks that you were wearing?
Well, of course, that didn't happen for me until I got sober.
Mm,
And, you talk about my son. So his senior year of high school, I realized that, you can split hairs any way you want to say it, but I found out that I had inadvertently become his drug supplier. And he had also become addicted to opiates. And, people talk about a bottom, and I don't necessarily talk about bottom. The day that the consequences of my addiction started to outweigh the benefits. And I think for a loved one that doesn't understand what it's like to have an addicted brain, like the benefits of this thing outweighed the consequences for so long, even when it looked like from the outside looking in that I was burning it all down. Right. I was burning the relationships down. I was burning it all down. And yet the consequences internally and emotionally were still outweighing the consequences. And I think the day that we began that I learned that this dynamic was happening with my son was the day that that shift started happening in my life, right? So I used for probably another 7 or 8 months after that, and the day after he graduated from high school, I checked myself in a facility to start sort of the detox portion of my journey. And because I have chronic pain, that was scary, right? I didn't know how we were going to navigate all of this. I'd spent 14 years using opiates to deal with the pain, and all of a sudden I wasn't going to have that anymore. And so that was a journey. But I think what I learned in that facility, I share this with people, like it was not a glamorous facility that I went to, right? It was a locked down mental hospital that had a little substance abuse sort of wing, right? I couldn't have my shoelaces or my strings and my sweatshirts, and they came and shone a light in my eyes every 15 minutes to make sure I hadn't self-harmed while I was sleeping, right? It was not a glamorous sort of rehab experience, but this is what I can say about that is I got exactly what I needed. And what I started to learn in that moment was that my abuse as a child very much participated in the reason why I found substance as a solution, and not only was that true for me, but it was true for 99% of the other people that were in that facility with me, right? Like we all had different stories and certainly not everybody's story was like mine, but everybody had a story where substance became the solution to. And in that moment, I started to give myself a little grace and I started to start questioning whether these narratives that I either had been told or had believed my whole life, I started to make some decisions about whether they were still true for me, whether I was still unlovable and not enough and unworthy, or was it just these stories that I created in this effort to just survive, right? And just my experiences growing up. And it took a long time, right? Because I still, after leaving this locked facility in 28 days, I still had to deal with the shame of my son's addiction. I still had to deal with my marriage at that point of 21 years that was broken, I thought, beyond repair. And my daughter at that stage was 21 and she hated me, right? Like I still had to deal with the real impacts of my addiction. but the stories inside of my head were at least starting to shift a bit, and I was becoming open to the fact that those stories no longer served me.
Yeah. Wow. That facility sounds just intense. I went to an inner city rehab facility and I lived at the time. I was on the streets, but I was in a pretty affluent county and they wanted to send me to the one in that county. I said, "No, send me to the inner city." And the social worker was like, "Why do you want to go to the inner city?" I'm like, "Because I need to really feel the impact
Yeah.
of this."
Yes.
And I think that that really does change how you approach it when you're in a total culture shock like
Yeah.
that.
Well, and can I say this too? Like, yes, it was not normal for me, right? I mean, there were many opportunities while I was there to say, in the you know what did we get here? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was exactly what I needed. It was the humility that I needed. Uh, I felt as though sort of these people were not assembled around me by accident, right? Like I felt like the people that were there were the ones that I needed to kind of do this work with from now probably until eternity. And I have so much gratitude for that opportunity really to go somewhere where some humility was required. Like it was time to look in the mirror and say, "Okay, how do we get here and how are we going to get out? Because this doesn't work in."
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, talking about like moving from that survival mode into your new identity, walk us through what that rebuilding process looked like for you and what surprised you most about what it actually took to rebuild your confidence without substances in the old pattern.
But yeah, I think that that's for anybody that is thinking about getting sober or is started this path of sobriety. I think that, one of the maybe delusions that I had in this journey was that I was going to have to do this work once and I was never going to have to come back to sort of the old messages or the shame or right. I was going to go do this and then we were going to move past it. And I think for many of us that are addicts, we sort of have this vision of the world that we're the only ones that are doing hard, right? Life looks so easy to everybody else. It looks like they don't have pitfalls, there's no barriers, like they're having the time of their life, and somehow we think that we're the only ones that are really struggling. And I think one of the most important lessons that I learned, even early on, from the people around me was this is hard and it's going to continue to be hard because you no longer have this one coping skill that you use to get through life, right? You're now going to have to feel sort of the experiences, the results of some of these old messages and old feelings, specifically my shame, right? I had a lot of shame as a child, but I had compounded that shame significantly through my addiction and my use, specifically in and around my kids. So I think what started helping me, and it's odd. I think one of the things, even soon after I started recovering from my own substance abuse, was starting to recover from codependency. And given the fact that my son was still in active use, my son used for another 3 years after I got sober. I think so much of my healing and starting to relearn the messages that were going on in my head was when I started to understand the impact of my codependency. And the truth is, I think I started using substance somewhat because of also some codependency that I had to this world, right? Like my reflection that I had to be a certain kind of human being in order to be liked, loved, and seen and appreciated. Some people ask me, like, what has been the most challenging hat for you to wear, whether it's the daughter of an alcoholic. By the way, my dad was my guy, right? So there was some challenges about being a daughter of an alcoholic when you idolize the man that is very inconsistent because of his drinking, right? So they ask, is it your dad? Is it your own process with addiction or is it your son's? And I can tell you unequivocally, without pause, the hardest hat that I have had to wear is being a mama of an addict, right? I think even with my own substance use problem, there was this tiny bit of control that I had that I could do today what would help me stay sober tomorrow, right?
Hmm.
Like I could do things that would help me in that journey, whereas with my son, You've never felt more powerless than when you have a loved one that is suffering with addiction. I truly believe that walking alongside of him in this journey has actually helped me grow in ways that if addiction was my only struggle, I'm not sure I would have grown in those areas.
Really? That's interesting. So you think and feel that by having your son and that responsibility and seeing what was going on with him was almost like a mirror that caused you to look deeper in upon yourself for correction?
100%, because this
Wow.
is the thing, and this is my experience with not only myself, but with families, right? Like, we don't cause somebody else's addiction. We don't take the substance, we don't cause it, we don't lie, we don't manipulate. We are not responsible for that person's addiction. But I can contribute, and I can contribute to the longevity of this thing.
Mm,
And when I'm contributing, doing it because of my own fears, my own stuff, my own needs that need to be met. Right. And so when I started to heal through that codependency, I started understanding that the fears that the stuff that I needed to deal with was the reason why I started to be codependent with my son. I'm a quote girl. I love quotes, and this quote is one that means everything to me by a gentleman named Joseph Campbell, and it's the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And not only was I seeking a treasure for myself, right, like the worth and the joy and the serenity and all of that, but I was seeking this treasure with this relationship with my child, but I was so codependent that I was actually manifesting the exact opposite experience because I was contributing to the longevity of his disease. And that is what started my healing. Real I mean, obviously there's been a lot of steps of healing, but I think the true transcendence and the true, I don't know, peace and serenity that have experienced is in combination to recovering from my own substance use problem and sort of this experience that I've had with my son.
You know, Joseph Campbell has some great quotes for sure. And that one you just relayed, it immediately reminds me of Marcus Aurelius, which is the obstacle is the way,
Yep.
one of his most
Yep.
well known.
Yep.
It's the same thing. Doing the hard thing will get you the best result. And it's very tough for all of us humans to do stuff like that because we're inherently lazy. Our brains are wired to do the easiest possible thing to get by. And that's also the reason that addiction becomes so challenging to all of us because we want to do the easy thing. And it's easier to just put on that mask than it is to actually do the work.
Well, and I think we're inherently fearful also.
Yeah.
Right? I think we're inherently fearful, and for me, not only am I lazy, which is true, but I'm also like, this cave is so much scarier when you're in the light looking into the darkness, right? You
Mm,
have all of these preconceptions of what's inside of that cave, whether it be bats and spiders and stalagmites, right? And it isn't until you walk into that cave that the reality oftentimes is a lot less scary
mhm.
because the amount of fear, we just stand on the outside and look in and say, "Where is this thing you call a treasure?" I'm just doing everything on the outside to try to find it, and it's just never you're never gonna find it.
Yeah. So you found yourself sober and you're working through your challenges with your son still walking through his addiction. When did that become, I'm going to become a life coach? And what was the genesis of that belief that I'm going to be good at this for others?
Yeah, it's so funny because actually when I was 23 years old, before I ever took an opiate in my life, I actually went to school to become a drug and alcohol counselor. I never actually finished. I had a baby and a lot of things happened, and then I got sick, and so I never actually finished the hours part of that. But there was always something inside of me that wanted to take my experience and help somebody else from the very beginning. But
Cool.
then obviously I went down a different path, became a mom, and then got sick, and my addiction took over. And I had been sober for about 18 months when I went to work for the outpatient program that I actually went to after I left the inpatient facility, and became part of the executive team there and loved every single bit about that work. I loved getting in the trenches with other alcoholics and addicts that were just starting their journey or those that were returning to it, right? Like I loved it. But there was this pull that was happening in me that was like, Jennifer, you have so many different perspectives of this thing, right? And I can still authentically help the addicts suffering by helping their families. And this perspective that I had, this pull, it just wouldn't go away. And so about 2 and almost a half years ago, I started my own business after working in the field of treatment for about 6 years and just find it my purpose, right? I just it makes sense of everything that I've kind of walked through to be right here in the trenches now with family members. And again, I'm still helping the addict that's recovering by healing this family structure, and I think that it's just the most rewarding thing that I've ever done.
That's fantastic. And at the end of the day, it's this big ripple effect that is being put in place because you're helping on the outside, which provides better support for the addict on the inside as they start to walk out of that. And anyone who is listening is www.riseaddictionlc.com, the best way to connect with you.
Yes, and you let me know. Make sure you put the www in front of it because apparently there's an issue with my website. So if you're listening to me right now, make sure the www.riseaddictionlc.com. And in there, there's a section that says let's work together. And even if that's not where you are to work together, there's a spot that says contact me. And this is the thing I know about addiction and being a mama of addiction of an addict. This thing is the most isolating experience that many of us have on this entire planet, right? Even as a mom or a dad or a sister or a brother, all of a sudden you don't have the same things to talk about with your neighbors, right? You're not going to coffee with people because they don't understand. And so if that's you and you're needing a connection, a resource in your community, or maybe I can help be that resource with you, please reach out to me and I would love to be able to connect.
Fantastic. Yes, definitely do. You have the expertise and background. It's not like we're talking about someone who's schooled in this. We're talking about someone who's walked it. And I think that that's super important when anyone listening connects with somebody is that always try to seek out people who've lived the experience and don't just have the credentials behind their name because you're going to find a much stronger wisdom behind what they tell you. It's the best advice I could possibly give.
Thank you.
So, someone listening right now, they feel like they're drowning everything around them, their family, maybe, they see a loved one who's struggling, they don't know what to do. Is there one perspective shift or maybe a small daily practice that you wish someone had told you earlier? It's like, Jennifer, if you just do this, you'll see the world a different way.
Well, I think that, I mean, I wish there was a silver bullet, right? Because I wish this was easy work. I wish also that it was linear, right? And you start at A and go to B and you never have to go back to A. I wish I could tell you that. But I do think that there are small things that we can start doing that are going to be important moving forward, right? If you're listening to me right now and you have a child or an uncle or a brother or a cousin that you are just deep in fear about when it has to do with addiction, I want you to do one thing today. I want you to get out a pen and a piece of paper and I want you to start writing about what it feels like. Right? I think, this is the thing about journaling. Sometimes we think that our journaling needs to be publishable when we're done writing it, right? And I'm here to tell you that is absolutely not true. There are days where my journaling is scribble, right? There are days where it's yelling. There are days, but it's so important to start getting this subconscious out of our bellies out, right? And I would say if you're saying to me, I don't journal, then voice text it. right now. Just get it out and start sharing your feelings, your authentic feelings. It doesn't need to go anywhere else. And that I think is such a foundational point to being able to heal from this thing. My guess is if you're listening to me and you struggle with codependency or your fear is making every decision for you right now, that you feel stuck in this, right? You feel like you can't breathe, you're fearful that your child is going to die or that they're going to be homeless, whatever that scenario is. The first step to start dealing with fear is to start getting it out of our bellies and onto a piece of paper. So if you're listening to me today, love for you to start that one step today.
That's fantastic. Great advice. I always recommend pen to paper.
Yeah. Yep.
So, many families, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I kind of want to go back to it a little bit when you talked about the road out, and restoring relationships. So, what is that long road of restoring relationships where you forgive yourself for all of the chaos you caused in your addiction? And then how do you work to rebuild those family dynamics? Because I would hope that you have rebuilt the relationship with your daughter, for instance, because you mentioned her earlier.
I have. My daughter's my best friend today, right? And it's been a journey. I think, and I can speak to this from both the addict's perspective and the loved one. I think I'll start with the addict part. My responsibility is to forever be accountable for the pain that I caused through my addiction, right? And I'm not talking like I need to be the end of somebody's resentment and I constantly need to be a punching bag. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I do have to be accountable for there are days where my daughter will be like, I saw this today and I am so triggered. And it's my responsibility to sit in that, right? And say, how can I help? Is there anything I can do that can help, right? I've sat in a lot of counseling offices with both of them where they've written letters and had conversations. I think one of the things that we do sometimes as addicts is we've been sober for like 30 minutes and we want everybody to get over everything that happened while we were using substance, right? Like, what do you want me to do? I've been sober for 30 minutes, right? You need to get over yourself. And the reality is, I think, we heal as a family when I acknowledge the impact of my addiction, whether it's my children or my husband, right? My husband and I have somehow found our way out of this thing and are able to, we'll be celebrating 30 years. And I think forever I will have to sit with the discomfort of how my addiction impacted everybody around me, right? And I think that is so, so important from an addict's perspective. Now, from a loved one's perspective, interestingly enough, there's a little bit about this too, right? Like it's oftentimes as loved ones, we want to just blame the addict. We just want to make it their problem, right? If they just go to rehab and stop using substance, then this problem is going to be done, and we just blame them for that. And again, I think this might be the most important thing I say all day. Substance is not the problem. Substance is the solution to the problem. So if your loved one goes and gets sober and they simply remove substance and come back into this dynamic, we still got this problem that we speak about, right? And oftentimes the problem is this idea that this person feels like a square peg in a round hole in this family dynamic, right? And the only way to find a solution to that is if everybody that's on your dance floor, I call it a dance floor, right? The dynamic of your family. If everybody on that dance floor can be authentically who they are. So if you've got 5 people and 4 of them are great, but one of them feels like a square peg in a round hole, we got to get off this dance floor and learn a new dance where everybody can be authentically who they are. And as loved ones, we have contributed to that. Right? It doesn't have to be trauma. It doesn't mean you weren't a good parent. It just is what it is. And so oftentimes when we heal relationships moving forward, when somebody's trying to get sober, we have to acknowledge how we have contributed. We have to acknowledge how our fear has contributed. Right? And when everybody comes from a place of, look, we all have some ownership in this. Again, I didn't use the substance. I didn't manipulate, I didn't steal all your belongings, but I did contribute to this dynamic and the reason why potentially you chose substance as a solution. If we're going to heal out of it, then we all have to come to that place.
Oh, well, Jennifer, thank you for sharing so openly and honestly. And everyone listening, here's the one perspective I want you to carry this month, inspired by Jennifer's journey. Addiction doesn't just steal from the person using, it reshapes entire families across generation. Healing asks us to stop performing strength and start building real grounded confidence. One honest choice, one boundary, and one restored relationship at a time. Now, Jennifer, we have a tradition with this series, and each guest leaves a question for the next perspectives guest. So, Katie Rizzo has left this specific question for you.
Okay.
What do you do to become something that's esteemable?
I do what I say I'm going to do, right? Um I am now somebody that you can count on, which is not the version of me that I was almost 9 years ago. And that's the only way I know how to provide a living amends to not only my family but the universe because I took so much.
That's great. So, what question do you want to leave the next person that sits in your chair?
That's a great question. Okay, let me think about this. What do you do when the dark moments return?
Ooh, that's a good one. I can't wait to hear that answer. Fantastic. Well, Jennifer, the floor is yours for the final 30, 45 seconds. Any words of wisdom or hope for our listeners who feel like they're drowning in this kind of generational cycle?
I want to say this, and if you're drowning right now, you're going to be like, "Yeah, I'm glad that happened for you, but I don't see that for me," right? But what I can promise you is if you have a loved one that's struggling with addiction right now, two things can happen at the same time. You can stop living in fear and you can find peace and you can start contributing to the solution of your loved one's addiction, right? We can't control it, but we can start contributing to them moving towards solution and recovery. And oftentimes we think that this is tough love, right? And this is what I have to tell you. This is so far from tough love. This is about learning how to have real trust and rapport with our addicted loved one, whether they ever get sober or not, right? We can build continued trust and rapport, and that's going to help them get sober in the long run.
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer. To everyone listening, remember, you're not alone in this. The ripples of addiction are real across every role in a family, but so is the strength to break the cycle and to rebuild something better. I'm Massimo Rigotti. This is the Sober Method Podcast. Please follow, like, subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who truly needs it. Remember, everyone, your future is sober.